George from BBPS. Morning, George.
Thank you so much, everyone. Good morning. Good morning, Samantha. Good morning, Peter. It's great to be here. This is a celebratory event for us, so please feel at ease. We're not going to have any hard questions. I just wanted to start with some appreciation and to thank all of you, and also to thank Samantha and Tanya Pedersen, who are at the forefront of this week to week. And this is a very, as you know, it's a very intense process. We have weekly meetings with Peter, with Nicole, with Shani, with Leah, and I just wanted to show some appreciation to all of those colleagues, because I think it's a great team that's creating something new. Just two things on my side. This started about 24 months ago, and we were thinking about a couple things. One is, how do we get the voices of people in the GPN, the young people, women, researchers at every level, not just the ASGs and not just the D2s and not just the res reps and not just the hot shot academic or think tank person from our region or country, but the voices of 17,000 or 20,000 people in the GPN who are doing research. And I think that's the first objective of this, and actually to have a signed paper, a signed policy brief. So much of what we do is anonymous inside the UN system in general. So we thought this is an interesting vehicle, an important place to create that. The second thing is to think about evidence, about peer review, about bringing in evidence that goes beyond economics. It's about politics, about gender, it's about sociology, it's about anthropology, it's about data science, environmental science, engineering. So what we've done is we've invited all of you to think about policy questions and to think about the future, and not to be so boxed in by discipline, which is something that often happens within the academic and think tank world. So we just wanted to say those two things, appreciation and also where we're going with this, which is to think about a vehicle that expresses the future of development, frankly, and it sounds like a cliche, but I think with these young new voices, with these young new themes, we're refreshing the template of the UN system in general. And notice I'm talking not just about UNDP. I think we're at the hub, at the center of the UN, and we have some core values based on the human rights approach and about environmental sustainability. And I think we transmit those in the work we do. So I just wanted to stop there and say thank you so much, and back over to you, Samantha. It'll be great to hear reflections from all of our colleagues. Back to you.
Thanks so much, George, for that introduction, and thanks for joining us today. As you mentioned, this exploratory approach has really allowed us to look into kind of the deep crevasses of what UNDP is working on in a really innovative approach, scientific, academic, in all of its forms. But really what this contributes to, and as the title of this event suggests, right, is thought leadership. What is UNDP working on that maybe isn't already mainstream, but is exploratory and can help us not only recover from the COVID-19 pandemic and build differently and more sustainably with transformation and with innovation, but can also pioneer us a new future towards Agenda 2030 and the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. So to speak a little bit on that and what the thought leadership angle is for the Development Future Series, we're really pleased and privileged to have Anjali, Director of Communications and Advocacy with BERA, with us today to add some remarks on what thought leadership looks like at UNDP and what its importance truly is. Thanks so much, and over to you, Anjali.
Thanks so much, Samantha. Hi, everyone. I'm so pleased to be here at this anniversary event. I feel like I was there at the beginning, so I don't know if that's the birth, but so very pleased to be here at the first birthday. I'm just going to talk for a couple of minutes about thought leadership at UNDP. You know, I think we all know UNDP has half a century of innovation and expertise and development across all corners of the world. And we have a tremendous platform to share those experiences, but we haven't always necessarily been that effective at connecting those big ideas, those lessons, that advice with different audiences, with the widest possible audience. And partly that's because there's so much information and noise out there, and it feels like that noise is growing all the time. And I think that's where Development Future Series comes in, and linked to that, you know, over the past few years, we've started to redesign how we communicate those big ideas. So the organization introduced the Global External Engagement Strategy in 2019. And that was really with the aim of bringing policy communication colleagues together to collaborate more for greater impact in our thought leadership. It's worked to some extent. It hasn't worked perfectly. I think we're still on that journey. And I think working with the authors of this series has really helped us to develop our thinking around that. And that's because a vital part of that external engagement strategy is our thought leadership, and the ideas, the work, and the pathways that comes from you all within the country, the region, and the global offices. And I think, as George was saying, it's vital that we diversify the voices of our thought leaders. And that's why this series is so incredibly important, because it takes in all of that expertise from our offices around the world. Because thought leadership isn't about people at HQ with titles, as George says, academics, ASGs. It is about people all across the world, in all areas of work, regardless of what that position is. But then the writing and the publishing of these reports is not just all there is to it, to the thought leadership. I really feel it's about linking those ideas, those what you found, the evidence that you find in these reports, to the right audience at the right time, and positioning UNDP as the innovator and the source for all of that intelligence, evidence, and thoughtfulness. So to help with that, as well as looking forward to what's going to happen with year 2 with the Development Future series, we're also going to launch a global editorial board, which is going to help UNDP even more identify and tell those stories that come from the ground, that really create real impact, and kind of that collective intelligence, I suppose, of UNDP. And for BERA, I think what we really want to do is try and help as much as possible connect all of that thought leadership to the right audiences at the right time. So for your part, keep producing those those bold reports. We really look forward to what's coming in year 2, and I'm also looking forward today to hearing about how that process has been from your side, because I think sometimes policy and communications are not like this, and we really should be. We should come together to co-create, to work together to make sure that all of the work that you're doing can reach the right audience and have the greatest impact. So back to you, Samantha.
Thank you so much, Anjali, for being here today and for those really thoughtful remarks. I do not speak alone in our debt of gratitude that we owe to you and to other comms colleagues across the GPN and across BERA. Thank you so much for not only believing in what we are doing and helping us achieve that, but amplifying that as well. And as you said, policy and communications aren't always put together in terms of from the very beginning, right? But we've really found true support in this through all of you. So thank you so much for what you've kindly offered and for joining us today. Now turning over to our DFS colleagues, Shani and Nicole, who will give us some updates specifically on what this thought leadership has looked like. We're particularly excited to have 6 of our authors with us today, who will be able to speak a little bit more towards the insights that they've produced. But the DFS encompasses much more than just 6 authors, and even the 6 authors that are with us today, most of them are co-authors, and some of their co-authors are here in the audience. So a warm welcome to all of them. But really, that's to mention that the authorship is broad and expansive, and we'd love to highlight some of the key insights, some of the really thought-provoking analysis that has come out of the past year, even if we can't host all on a panel. So over to Shani and Nicole to present what that has looked like for us and give us some more of those deep dives. We'll post the links to all of the papers in the chat, but if you have specific questions for any of the authors or would like to be connected with them, please feel free to let us know in the chat box, and we'll make sure to facilitate that connection offline. But over to you two now. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Sam, and thanks, Anjali. Could you put up the slides from your side? Yeah, oh, you already have. Thank you. Great. Okay, so it's been a very busy first year for the Development Future series, and you're going to hear some of the real highlights from the authors in just a few minutes, but let me share with you some of the metrics. So as of today, we've received over 100 proposals from individuals and teams in over 25 country offices across all 5 regions and many parts of headquarters. In 2021, the first year of the DFS, we published 25 papers. Majority of those were from the COVID-19 call for papers. We have another 62 policy briefs and working papers in the pipeline. And this is really a testament to the intellectual curiosity of UNDP staff and their commitment to explore unknown territories and dive deep into data and produce analysis and policy recommendations that can help us to recalibrate the decade of action in the face of post-COVID realities. So if you look at the next slide, you can see the breakdown of papers between the general pipeline and the specific call for papers on COVID's impact on development earlier this year. Almost half of the papers published so far have been by women. And last month, we launched the call for papers on new development solutions to address crisis and build resilience. And we've received 30 proposals so far, with a few more coming, and full gender parity across the authors, and geographic diversity, as well as a pretty impressive diversity of levels of UNDP colleagues who are submitting proposals. 13 proposals came from country offices across all 5 regions, 10 from headquarters, and 7 from regional hubs. So on the next slide, you'll see there are, across the first 25 publications, the papers have explored policy solutions across a variety of the SDGs, almost all of them, with concentrated research around reducing poverty and inequalities, and promoting economic growth and peaceful institutions as the kind of primary areas of focus. And let me hand over to Nicole now to kind of tie this thought leadership back to UNDP's signature solutions.
Thank you, Shani. Can you see me, everyone? Thank you, Shani, and thank you to everyone who's made the Development Future series such a fascinating resource. Yes, so doesn't the policy papers and working papers that we've been allowed to publish not only span the SDGs, the set of SDGs, they also span UNDP's 6 signature solutions. Most of them, which you can see on the next slide, most of them do center around poverty, keeping people out of poverty, with 9 policy briefs and working papers so far on issues ranging from empowerment and livelihoods to social protection, small and medium-sized enterprises, jobs, poverty mitigation, the brand span of the signature solution number 1, with papers coming from Colombia, Bangladesh, all across the world. Really, really fascinating work and pioneering work on topics such as income support during the pandemic, etc. Also, many papers on the next slide are regarding governance, with papers relating to topics on government services, human rights, state capacities, civic engagement. Really a great span of issues and research that has gone into this area of work. Moving on crisis, we have already published policy briefs and working papers on topics related to crisis prevention and increased resilience. And you just heard also, you might have already submitted papers on this new the new topic going forward, the new call for papers that we hope to publish in early next year. And going on, but we have had papers received and published on environment and energy, spanning topics across, also from across the world, thinking about nature and crisis, and thinking about very innovatively how environment is linked to the pandemic. Moving on, gender equality, papers also centered on gender equality, and we're looking into also possibly looking more in depth on that topic in the future. Topics related to technologies, to digitalization, and how the pandemic has impacted gender equality across the world. So fascinating work there too. We will hear from authors, as Samantha already told us, that have published policy papers, policy briefs. Just to highlight on the next slide, a couple of the really innovative working papers also that we've received and published, working papers being the longer research papers that presenting in-depth research on many of the very central challenges that we're facing at the moment, such as discussions around income support and providing data that supports policy recommendations on income support. And next slide shows another example on related to migration and forced displacement, and making recommendations around that topic area. So really fascinating research and insights, and we hope that all of these things, all of these papers and these thoughts and recommendations are also helpful in your work going forward. Thank you so much, and I'll hand back over to Samantha.
Thank you so much, both Shani and Nicole, for those oversights and insights. Very helpful to see it presented in that way. And as both mentioned, and as I believe we'll state later, this resilience call for papers, which I see some prospective authors in the audience today, will be focused on resilience, but from a very integrated angle as well. Many of the proposals thus far have shown that the Development Futures series and the topics that it covers are integrated and are very multidimensional and multi-sectoral, which is, of course, I think a reflection upon the work that UNDP does and the way that it moves cohesively across its thematic areas and portfolios of work, but also is very encouraging and refreshing to see that authors have considered these components almost as inextricably, right? You can't submit a proposal without considering the other sectors. So it's exciting, and we can't wait to publish those in 2022 and of course report back progress there. So as previously mentioned as well, we do have a panel of authors that we're so eager and excited to present to you today and share with you. They are 6 authors of our policy brief. Some of them are repeat authors, which we feel even more privileged that they've trusted us twice with their research and analysis. I'll introduce them to you here in just a second, but how this will work is we have 2 rather informal questions that we'd like to get their insights on. One is about the process of what it's like to engage in this type of work, right? Perhaps not traditionally working in thought leadership. All of these authors have made that name for themselves over the course of the past few months as they've engaged in really thoughtful and insightful analysis and sharing kind of the broad, futures thinking and foresight for sustainable development moving forward. So we'd love to highlight them today in a question about what the process was like, but then a second follow-up question on how their kind of individual topics that they worked on so carefully over the past few months will have the potential to go on to shape UNDP policy and thought moving forward, as all of these topics that they have written on span the portfolios of work that UNDP considers its 6 signature solutions. So we have a diversity in regional representation here, but also in terms of thematic focus, which we're very excited to showcase to you all here. So without further ado, I will introduce to you our 6 authors and invite them to join us for the panel. So colleagues, if you wouldn't mind turning your videos on for us if they're not already. The first question that I have for you today is related to thought leadership, right? It's as George, Peter, and Anjali have all mentioned, the research and analysis that you have produced have strengthened UNDP's thought leadership and this disruptive thinking, right? This collective action of the organization. I'm curious about what that process was like for you. We would love it if you could share with us your experiences of conducting this research and publishing your findings and insights with the DFS. What has this been like? What have you learned? Etc. So our 6 authors today, as shown on the screen, Kishan, Eva, Christian, Reina, Klaus, Inilardia, will now turn over to you. First, if I could move to Kishan for a few comments from you, you have the floor.
Thanks, Samantha. Hi, everyone. Pleasure to be here, and congrats to everybody involved in this first anniversary of the DFS. Well, for us, I think it was really a experiential, reflective process, and really a nice opportunity in that sense of being able to reflect on a lot of our, on the ground work on some of these issues. So in my case, the policy brief on rethinking nature, crisis, and complexity, and really an opportunity to reflect on the last almost decade of work that the team and I have been leading on, trying to address this multidimensionality of risk and crisis that's taken shape specifically in the Arab region. So of course, one of the more dramatic evolutions of fragility and crisis, I think, globally in modern history over the last decade in the Arab region after the uprisings, but also with the emergence of the last big zoonotic disease, MERS, and then onwards to obviously the new one. So, I mean, reflecting on the last decade in terms of how that multidimensionality has impacted communities. So on one hand, and on the other hand, really trying to capture some of the success stories or good practices, local initiatives of how UNDP has really led green solutions, green recovery pathways across those various kinds of crises, and how that can bring lessons for going forward from COVID-19 in terms of the green recovery agenda. And so I think that the idea there is to bring forward some experiences from the past in recent years on green recovery to shape our emerging strategies, learning from country to country. So capturing some of the interesting country actions and results so that other neighboring countries can learn from this kind of regional brief, but also shaping bringing some of the examples or model practices from the country level to our global strategies, such as the new nature strategy, the new energy strategy, and the emerging new kind of evolving climate strategy for that matter. So looking at how we can really scale up this work on green recovery going forward.
Thanks so much. And I know we'll hear more from you a little bit about how your brief directly relates to the green recovery, specifically on kind of the climate crisis complexity nexus. But now maybe we can hear from Eva about what the process was like for you.
Yeah, hi, I'm really glad to be here, and well, speaking about the process. So from the outbreak of the pandemic, I have been tracking the news on the topic, and being responsible for challenge funds, it came natural to me to focus on innovations and to think how we can link our work on challenge funds with the pandemic crisis. Because, challenge funds are small-scale interventions, but we pay constant effort at the regional level to create larger impact. And in May 2020, one of the articles got my attention. It was pointing out that air pollution may be contributing to the factor to the COVID-19 pandemic. And it was at the same time when we were preparing contracts for the first winners of the Polish Challenge Fund. And one of them was Erle. It's a Polish innovator and promoter of air quality. So from the very first meeting, from the very first beginning, we have been discussing with Erle, the idea to collect the data and just some recommendations linking to this topical agenda. Because firstly, Erle's solution is based on sensors collecting real-time, accurate, and wide range of air quality data. They measure everything from concentration of suspended particulates, gases to ozone. Secondly, because Erle has a strong scientific team, which helps medical universities to study the impact of air pollution on human body. And they made similar analysis, checking the correlations between COVID-19 cases and deaths to air pollution in Poland. And thirdly, it was because Erle solutions scaled very quickly in our region. They started in Belarus, but they made it to cities of Bosnia and Herzegovina, Serbia, Ukraine, and North Macedonia. So basically we had experience, we had a tool, we had the data. And on top of that, we also got the support from climate change and DRR team at Istanbul Regional Hub, which has been working on air quality in general for some time. So it was really great, to put all the things together, and the offer to publish the results on the Development Future series really came on the right time. So yeah, that was it.
Thanks so much for those reflections. And you hit a really important point that I think a few of our other authors here have also experienced, right? Of how to make sense of rapidly emerging and changing data, especially related to the pandemic, right? When so many governments and agencies are working with the unpredictability and uncertainty of lack of complete data. So all the more impressive that you were able to produce it so quickly and with such robustness as well. So thanks so much for sharing. If we could move over to Christian to speak a little bit about the process for you.
Well, thanks, Amanda. I'm very happy to be here today and to have been part of this process. I prepared a small slide just to kind of share with you a little bit about the process we followed and how it was like for us to conduct this research. So if you can confirm to me that you see the screen. So essentially, here in Paraguay, this really started from the work that we are doing in the accelerator lab. And so as part of the accelerator lab, basically, we started to work on things related to collective action, and we started to support and articulate some of those collective actions. And in the midst of the pandemic, so at the beginning of the pandemic, there was a lot of collective action starting to emerge in Paraguay, and I think in everyone in the world, from people were starting to get together to aid one another and to produce mutual aid. And the Ag Lab here in Paraguay has this mission of kind of being a somewhat R&D unit within the UNDP, that we can produce knowledge that can later inform the action or the different programs that we are actually taking on to the field. And since we were doing this at the same time of producing knowledge, we have the mandate also to kind of like act with the partners and to produce some innovation within the different projects that we are conducting. So all that actually led us to ask a few questions, and we came up together. We are right now a team of 4 people in the Ag Lab. And one of those questions was really, what was the structure of these social capital networks that were being put into action within the as the pandemic unfolded, right? People were getting together, they were doing some things, and we wanted to understand if we could identify gaps between that collective action and the demand for aid or the vulnerability in the territories, right? And that led us, when we started to explore that, we started to realize that we didn't really have data on that, right? That there wasn't really good data on that. We started to experiment with proxies, with secondary data, with data from the household survey, data from different maps. And it was really for us an experimental kind of process, right? A process where we were just trying and failing. And as we were doing that, we were learning. And that led us to ask the second question in this slide, which is, what is the real relation between social capital networks and collective action in Paraguay? So we designed this big survey. We had some funds from our own project from the lab, and we decided, let's go out and let's measure this, right? Let's do this work of actually asking people what their networks look like, and what are their networks made of, and how is that actually connected to the collective action that is happening in their territories, in their communities. So that's what we reported in this short paper this policy brief. One of the most interesting things of this process was that we went back and forth from these, trying and failing with the data that was available, and then go into actual measuring things, and then go back and see if that things that we were, those things that we were measuring, how can they connect with the secondary data, and if we can design some kind of intervention, right? And that's more or less the next stage of this, right? In a way, this process is following this path of learning, where we started to discover the concept, then we explore through this survey what the relations are, and now we are moving into what type of public policy intervention we can actually design from this kind of learning that we have, or this research that we have came up. And in this process, one of the most interesting things that we had a chance to do is we had the chance to engage with a group of national and international experts that validated or just gave feedback to the work that we were doing. So it became really a collaborative effort where not only our team at the Ag Lab was working on, because we had like the actual mandate of doing research, but also we started to have this conversation with actors in the political system, in the innovation system in Paraguay. They started to give feedback to us. And now we are at the point of deciding what the stage of experimentation will be like. And I will be sharing a little bit more of that as we take on the next question. But really, this was a collaborative effort, and I'm very happy that we had the chance to have a venue to make it visible, because there is, as you said before, there is a lot of anonymous work on this that sometimes doesn't get visible, and Development Future was an opportunity for us to make it visible. So that's what I wanted to share on this question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christian, and thank you for the really helpful overview of how you came across this data. I'm sure I can speak for many of the authors here in that this is a great way of kind of organizing your thoughts and the process itself to help those that are interested in publishing in the future. So thanks for that thorough overview. Maybe we could move on to Reina of specifically on the topic of your brief is using non-traditional data. So how you came to the process of using that and what it was like for you.
Great, thanks, Samantha. Yeah, it's a privilege and pleasure to be here with all of you. Yeah, for us, the work is actually done by the team at Pintig Lab, which is also a new lab. Data and analytics lab for the Philippines country office, modeled after like the UN Global Pulse Labs. So for us, really, it's leveraging data to get insights and data-driven policy recommendations. And the pandemic brought to bear the importance of data and real-time, more higher frequency and higher granularity data to make important decisions for policymakers, both in government and in society more broadly. And UNDP, through Pintig Lab and our colleagues, help the government, help the Philippine government and the health ministry, the health department in particular in setting up data management that's needed for pandemic response and recovery. As the pandemic evolved, the team will start thinking about the importance of looking at using data for the longer term socioeconomic recovery, as well as for achieving the sustainable development goals. And so this was the context for the work that was published, and it started with an idea, the hypothesis of whether we can use these non-traditional data sets from the private sector to track the pace of recovery for different Philippine households. We were able to acquire a novel data set from market research on fast-moving consumer goods, which are routinely used in companies for marketing and strategy, right? But not, as far as we know, have not been used for development research in the Philippines. So for me as a data scientist and researcher, that was really exciting to see what we can discover from this data set. And that's what we did, no? And we were able to quantify the disparity and impact of COVID-19 across different economic groups and geographic areas in the Philippines, and also finding signatures of the impact of cash aid for the poorest households, which is very interesting. The process, I'd say, also is rewarding because of the collaborative nature and the coming from different perspectives within the team. So myself, I'm actually from an astrophysics and data science background, but sharing with the data and the results with my teammates from social science background, economics background, and policy background, we're able to glean the insights and take out the policy recommendations that we're able to put forward for the paper. And the inputs from the peer reviewers, from global expertise of the DFS, so able to put together, was really also helpful for us in refining our ideas and improving the work, and of course moving it forward, bringing it to our government partners also as a published result, also as a big boost to the work. So really happy to be part of this.
Thank you so much, Reina. And I know that your paper specifically, and as you mentioned with your own background, right, in astrophysics and the like, right, is a great example of how colleagues working with different backgrounds, with different levels of expertise, can come together to produce a really innovative cross-sectoral approach. And as you mentioned, using different data sets from different actors in society really contributed to making this possible. And the DFS was fortunate to be able to publish your findings through its platform. So really a great example of how cohesive, but also integrated and cross-sectoral these briefs really are. So thanks for your remarks there. Klaus, turning over to you about your paper on fragile contexts and in crisis settings. What was the process like for you to write about the 6 countries that you did? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much, Melissa or Samantha and the team behind Samantha and the whole Development Futures series. It was really a great process for my co-author, Ethan Harrison, and myself. So our paper we published on the secondary impacts of the COVID pandemic, especially looking at the civic space and how the COVID pandemic became a catalyst for closing down or narrowing down on civic space. So we sit at a very small team, relatively small team in the Crisis Bureau, working a lot with data. Before we published this paper, we published another paper where we looked into the secondary impacts of the pandemic, where we used the UNDP's socioeconomic impact assessments. And this paper was authored by Gregory Connor earlier or late last year. So we had that paper in mind, and then we thought there was a lot more actually to look into beyond the socioeconomic aspect, and also looking into more the political aspect, which of course is a sphere where civic space moves in. So for this paper, we looked at aspects, conflict, and political violence data. We looked at the VDEMS data set on violations of democratic standards. And then, of course, we looked at various COVID statistics. We took these statistics and then we compared them across different fragile settings and chose 6 specific settings, national settings, to look into where we really explored sort of commonalities and dynamics. So looking at this democratic standards and civic space in this way is really interesting, of course. And I think for us, it really highlighted the need to look beyond just economics and beyond just socioeconomics, and really dig into what has COVID meant for, and the pandemic meant for the civic space. But saying that, the Data Future series really allowed us to sit with a lot of the data that we sit on a daily basis, and allowed us time and headspace to really dig in to the data, and allowed us an audience to share that data and the findings that we had. And then, of course, the peer review mechanism was extraordinary, because it gave us access to UNDP's experts, who then provided us input on the recommendations. So it really allowed us a space to reflect about some of the findings that we actually sit with on a daily basis, but we rarely have time to sort of sit down and really reflect on. So I think that was a great process for us.
Thank you so much, Klaus, for that. And a great nod to a previous DFS author, right? As you mentioned, Gregory Connor, and the insights that came about. So as we've seen thus far, right, much of the data is coming from a variety of sources. So we hope that serves as inspiration for our future authors, but also as a great testament to how the current authors and the past authors have really been able to mobilize different sources of data for their findings, and to extract really potent and powerful policy recommendations as a result. So thanks very much, Klaus, for that reminder. And last but certainly not least, we're going to turn over to Ilaria, who has co-authored 2 briefs with us at the DFS, and would love to hear about the process for both of them, but specifically on your work writing for a brief on the care economy for our COVID call for papers. Ilaria, over to you.
Thank you, Samantha, for the question, and thank you to you and to the DFS team for this invitation to speak about the findings and the key messages of our brief, which I co-authored with Bharati Sadasivam and Komi Ayoy, regional gender advisors, respectively, for the Europe and Central Asia region and the Asia Pacific region. And I can see them that are participating today. We built our analysis on available data from time use surveys, from socioeconomic impact assessment reports, and national and regional surveys that track the huge increase in women's unpaid care work during the COVID pandemic. And this can be seen, for instance, in Turkey and in Moldova. We use surveys and studies that were conducted in these 2 countries. And we then, considering the alarming increase in women's labor market activity and also unpaid care responsibilities borne by women, we then decided to analyze the response from governments to combat this trend, and we found that this response, unfortunately, has been insufficient. At the time that we wrote the brief, only 11% of all social protection and labor market measures that were adopted by governments addressed unpaid care work. And unfortunately, the most recent data that was captured by the COVID-19 Global Gender Response Tracker that has been developed by UNDP and UN Women shows that this share has now dropped even further to 7.3%. We think that this calls for enhanced efforts by governments, by UNDP, and also by our relevant partners and stakeholders to include the care economy among their priorities. That's why we developed some recommendation in our brief, and we hope that this recommendation will serve as a starting point for UNDP to scale up projects, both at national, regional, and global level, and also to strengthen support to governments and also to enhance partnerships with relevant stakeholders, because we need to prioritize the care economy. And most importantly, and this has been shown by the COVID pandemic and this crisis, we need to build strong and gender responsive care infrastructures. And I would like to provide more information probably about the recommendation and the key findings in the next, after the next part. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ilaria. Really appreciate your insights there. Colleagues, I'm aware of the time and that we have 10 minutes left scheduled, but I'm hoping because we got a little bit of a late start, you'll grant us another 5 or 10 minutes so that we can ask our colleagues a second and follow-up question specifically about the content of their briefs. So I'll now turn it over to Leah and Tanya, both DFS colleagues, who will carry out asking the second set of questions to our authors here. Thanks so much, and over to you, Leah.
Thank you, Samantha, and hello to the authors. Thank you all for your contributions to this series. In lieu of time, we had some behind the scenes discussions, and we're going to fast forward a little bit through the second part. So I would invite the authors to share with me and the rest of the audience the one main policy implication that stems from their research, and kindly just really highlight the main outcome in this regard. Thank you. Maybe we start with the reverse order. Ilaria, maybe you go first.
Yes, thank you, Leah. So starting from our policy brief, we argue that UNDP needs to address the issue of unpaid care work on 3 fronts. First of all is policy and advocacy. We must intensify efforts to tackle and to dismantle harmful social norms and cultural stereotypes that consider women and girls as the main caregivers, either in households or as poorly paid and trained workers in the informal care sectors. That's why knowledge and awareness-raised campaigns that are conducted with our partners in governments, the private sector, civil society organization, and also women's rights advocates are essential to change attitudes and to redistribute unpaid care work between women and men. We, as UNDP, should also advocate for family-friendly workplace policies, which include flexible work arrangements and public and private childcare and elderly care provisioning. I think that UNDP, both at the regional global level, can do so by complementing efforts and also by leveraging data and conducting research to develop analysis and studies, including in collaboration with other partners and UN agencies. This has been done, for instance, in Asia Pacific, where UNDP is currently developing a study that is focusing on the childcare sector, and is doing so in collaboration with ILO and the UN Research Institute for Social Development. Secondly, I think that we need to turn care work into decent work. We need to develop a care sector that provides employment on competitive terms to all. To do this, UNDP needs to assess the status of employment in the care sector, and these include also assessing its working conditions. It needs to help countries, governments to develop national legislation that ensures employment that it's in line with international labor standards, and also establishing, for instance, occupational standards and training qualifications that can incentivize formal work and also provide quality social care services that are essential to professionalize the care sector. UNDP can support ministries in that sense. For instance, this is what we are currently doing in Moldova, to develop these occupational standards and also to set up mechanisms that would recognize and certify professional competencies and qualifications that are very often acquired by caregivers in non-formal or informal settings. And third is the core issue of investment. Given the global care crisis in care that was exacerbated by the pandemic and revealed by the pandemic, we must support governments at the national and at the local level to prioritize investment in the care sector. Data shows that such investment has a high fiscal multiplier and also contributes to inclusive and sustainable growth. In our brief, we mentioned a simulation study that was conducted in Turkey, and the authors found that additional funding of about 1 to 2% of GDP in early childhood and childcare services generates 2.5 times as many jobs as investment in the construction sector. With most of them.
Sorry, we're running really out of time, so sorry to interrupt you. Thank you for highlighting this, and I think it's a super important topic that UNDP really should get going, and I hope that our Gender and Crisis Facility can also make a contribution to implementing these recommendations in the future, especially in crisis countries, where this is of course a super important issue to empower women. I would like to hand over to Krishan now. Krishan, can you kindly limit yourself to a very brief input and focus on the main policy recommendation? Just one, please. Thank you.
Yeah, happily. Well, I mean, the pandemic really is a giant kind of hand slapping kind of 6 billion people in the face in terms of the nexus of nature and crisis, right? So, I mean, the COVID-19 pandemic is really an opportunity to really take, put in place, we think development as a socio-ecological system. So getting away from the socio-centric, human-centric and linear approaches of past and even current development thinking and policies. So at this upstream policy level, the coming years under the new strategic plan in particular is a really important opportunity to advance nature-based development policies, systems approaches, the new metrics such as the planetary development index and more broadly, but really trying to engage at the local level, the community level, like different worldviews about the nexus of the social and the ecological. It's also really laying out the policy brief practical recommendations for advancing green recovery and expanding green recovery. And so, for example, climate resilient infrastructure build back from the crisis. This is something that's been shaping up on the agenda in the Arab region over the last several years following reconstruction after conflict. How do we do this also going forward post-pandemic? Solar solutions for displaced communities the last several years in the Arab region. How can this also support rebuilding livelihoods and community resilience after the pandemic? And various other examples. And this can really be an opportunity to scale up this kind of systems approach, and the socio-ecological approach is being taken by put in place at the center of a lot of donor strategies coming up, including the next Global Environment Facility, GF strategy. It's at the core of it, the systems approach, and under an overall umbrella of green recovery from COVID-19. So that's a $4 billion green recovery fund in effect. And so this is really an opportunity to come together across different parts of the house and different parts of the GPN for integrated programming and to advance the green recovery with our partners. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Krishan. I mean, your reference about COVID slapping 6 billion people in the face, I think this is something that is very clear and very easy to remember for us. A good quote, thank you. Over to Klaus.
Thank you so much, Leah. So in this shortness of time, let me be quite brief. So I think from where we are sitting and the data that we have gone through and displayed in our paper, it's quite clear that there's a need to be more preventive in building civic resiliencies, right, and strengthening the civic space. And why I'm saying that is really that COVID sort of really magnified the existing tensions and exposed vulnerabilities and really significantly undermined trust in government and established social cohesion, right? But we saw that on a global level, but in the fragile context that we looked in, these shocks can really quickly be, let's say, facilitated to really narrow down the civic space. And I think the finding that we found also, of course, interesting is that the COVID, while of course it's a sort of unique phenomenon in modern time, it's not unique in its ability to be a catalyst to close down civic space in these fragile settings, right? That could also happen by elections, armed conflict, terrorist attacks, and so on. So the general need to be preventive. And in order for us to be that, there's an incentive or sort of a reasoning to say that, well, we need to identify the triggers. We need to identify which are these catalysts, how do they affect in different countries. So what are really the early warning signs? So it's important for us to understand, reflect on those warning signs, and then of course monitor those signs that we have identified to really be able to pinpoint which directions is a specific country going in. And I think that's really where our unit sits. And I think that's also really where the UNDP's data strategy is going, right? Much more anticipatory, much more preventive. So I think that's really something that we can take out of our paper and maybe apply across the fields that we work in as UNDP. I hope that was timely enough, Leah.
No, that was excellent, Klaus. Thank you so much for keeping on track. Okay, so next one, Raina, over to you. Klaus set the standard very good, so good orientation for you. Thank you.
Yes, so the findings from the brief really underlined the need for a comprehensive social protection program to cover the vulnerable groups, especially the poorest households in the Philippines, and showed that while the government subsidies help families temporarily, there is need for greater support through more cash assistance and social protection measures. And what we've demonstrated is that we can use data information to guide the planning of these social protection programs, and more broadly, that non-traditional data can complement official statistics and indicators to not only look at socioeconomic indicators, but even more broadly, we can look at using these non-traditional data to monitor and evaluate the country's progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals. So something that the team is also working on. I will leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Raina, and apologies for rushing all of you. I know you have such valuable research, and we don't get into the depths of it as we anticipated it. But I guess that's even more a reason then for all of us to read the full papers and get all the insights that are there. Thank you, Raina. Over to Christian.
Thank you, Leah. So for us, the key insight that came out of our exploratory policy brief is that the community community commons or resources like a public space, like a committee of producers that have some assets to work on that with resiliency are really linked. So in the policy brief, our first exploration into this was just making an analysis of correlation in the data we got from the survey. But we are now going deeper into this data, and as we model some relationships on that data, doing some econometric analysis, we are actually finding that this particular result is strengthening, and that is leading us to engage in a design process to really prototype community commons and civic engagement programs with a focus on the participatory design and management, because that's the element that we are seeing is really linked in reducing vulnerabilities. And after we have we engage in this participatory design process, our goal is to work with the CEO here to create a portfolio of experimentation with programs that promote the co-creation of community commons and to evaluate their impact on social cohesion and resiliency. So that's in a very brief way what we are taking as a key insights and where we are moving on next.
Thank you, Christian. Last but not least, over to Eva.
Yeah, thank you. So 3 main points from our research, very briefly. So is it definitely clear, that bad air quality is major health risk factor, and it's additional reason, why we need to go on the recovery path of COVID-19, which is, greener. However, this might not be clear to everyone because, pollution is complex phenomenon. There is lack of data, people do not understand data, and they don't even trust the source of the data. But the engagement of similar solution to that of Airly might change this game because Airly incorporates easy to use and check by yourself approach in the tool itself. So if you open, the dashboard, you can see graphic presentation of the air quality index, which makes it very easy to understand for the general users and policymakers. The second point is that pollution doesn't stop at the border. Air pollution is a transboundary environmental problem, and it requires resources, partnerships, and diverse capacities to leverage best practices. So we definitely need to work more and closer together and share the results. And let me underline once again the fact that, we get significant input from the platform of air pollution, which is, consisting in our region, and, we build on the research from them. Also, the third point is the fact that pollution or the pandemics won't wait. So we need to think outside of the box, and we need to implement new tools, which allows us to bring fast and at the same time accurate solutions into the development. Polish Challenge Fund has been launched in March 2020. And one of the first winners make this significant contribution, but our experience with Challenge Fund proves that this is not exception. For example, Select Challenge Fund has been proven successful by bringing state-of-art telehealth devices and saved lives in North Macedonia during the last year. And the Challenge Fund itself, this tool is amazing because it really helps to bring on board solutions which might be usually overseen or hard to engage by traditional procurement methods, because the assumption is that without the Challenge Fund support, such activities are either unlikely to happen or will happen at a later stage. So definitely Challenge Funds are opening the doors to the new partnerships, which is a great base for our work, but also the multilateralism itself. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Eva. Thank you all, and apologies again for rushing you all through this. Sorry about that. Samantha, back over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Leah, and thank you so much, colleagues. I've posted all of the links to your papers in the chat, and we'll also follow up to all attendees that we'll have those links so that they can follow up with questions or further dialogue. Last but certainly not least, I'd love to turn this over to Peter Batchelor, one of our co-leads, fearless leads of the DFS, for his closing remarks on where the DFS is headed in 2022. Peter, over to you.
Thanks, Samantha, and a big thank you to all of you today for joining us to celebrate our birthday, our first anniversary of the Development Future series. So thanks for your presence here today. A particular thank you to the 6 authors who joined us today, and also to your co-authors. Congratulations for really outstanding research and insights. And it was, as George said, lovely to hear new voices from around the world on such fascinating topics. So really a big thanks to all of you. I'd also want to acknowledge and appreciate the peer reviewers, some of whom are with us today, who helped you finalize the papers. Thanks to our bearer and other colleagues for the support on the comms and advocacy. Thanks to Anjali for joining us as well. And colleagues, we're now into our 2nd year. And as you've already heard, we have a new call for papers on development solutions for crisis and fragility. And as Shani mentioned, there's already been a huge uptake in that call for papers. So please, if you want to join the next call for papers, do send us in your proposals on that. We will also be looking for a specific call for papers on gender issues coming up shortly. This is to coincide with the new gender equality strategy that the gender team is developing. So that's a nice linkage with with that gender equality strategy, but of course also with our signature solution number 6 that some of you have already worked on. Laurie, I'm looking at you. So thanks for that. Maybe we'll see you again in that call for papers. And then we're looking ahead now for the remainder of the year, thinking about some of the enablers for the strategic plan, including digital finance and innovation as potential new topics for later in the year. But as they say, watch this space, and we encourage you all to join us in those call for papers as well. So with that, let me thank you all again for joining us today. A huge thank you to Samantha for putting today's event together, to my co-chair and partner in crime, George. Thank you so much. Always, it's a great pleasure working with you and the team. To Shani, Tanya, and Nicole and Leah, thank you. It's been a great first year, and we look forward to the second year. And as we close today, Samantha will just share with you the website for submitting papers for those of you who may have not submitted for the current call for papers but would like to do so. So with that, thanks again, everybody, and have a great day, and see you all soon. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you
all.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.